podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Two-Footed Podcast, your daily dive into the biggest stories and talking points from the world of football, with a particular focus on the Premier League. Before we get started, a quick shout out to our presenting sponsor, Liberty Shield. Liberty Shield is a VPN provider, and one of the many benefits of their service is that you can change your IP address to unlock geo-restricted content. And for Premier League fans like us, that means you can catch all the action no matter where you are. So if you use the UK VPN, that means you get all live matches on Sky Sports, TNT Sport, Amazon Prime, and the highlights with Match of the Day on BBC iPlayer. Furthermore, you can switch your location to the USA to access all those matches you may otherwise miss using American streaming services like Peacock and USA Network. If you sign up now, you can get 25% off by using the code EPL25OFF. That's EPL25 off at checkout for 25% off. That's whether you choose their VPN router or the software app for your favorite devices. Liberty Shield have got you covered. Oh, and don't forget, after today's episode, be sure to check out our shorter bite-sized pod, the Two-Footed Extra. That will keep you up to speed with all the latest news and gossip. And be sure to check out the other shows that EPL Index offers. Today was hugely enjoyable, a tad predictable, previewing every Premier League round with a different guest each week, where he really does put them through the ringer. You come off that show, I've guested on that show, you come off it, and you feel like you've been interrogated. It's a really good listen, though. There's also our new show, our roundup show. It's called The Final Whistle. It's hosted by Nina Kauser and Ben Poscod, and they summarise all the matches and the big talking points. It comes out every Sunday evening, so make sure you're listening. Now, let's dive in to today's biggest stories. What's good, boys and girls? Two-Footed Podcast. Today is Tuesday. It is the 17th of September. Hope you're all well and having yourselves a pleasant day. The sun is once again very high in the sky, very bright and quite warm. No clouds at all, just blue sky everywhere. It's unusual. It's September, and we didn't get any of this in, June, July, or August. But we move. Right. So, if we take a look at the Premier League table, there are two teams yet to take a single point. We've got Everton and we've got Southampton. Southampton are newly promoted. Everton have been stuck in a malaise for a long, long time. We'll talk about Everton a little bit later in the week. I don't feel like with Everton there's as immediate a need for panic or change. I feel like with Southampton, this could get away from them very, very quickly and put them in a position where the season becomes unsalvageable quite quickly. So we're 4 games in. They've lost all 4, obviously. They've scored 1 goal. They've conceded 8. And when you look at the fixtures coming up, they are make or break. Their next game is home to Ipswich. They absolutely have to win that game, because then they go to Bournemouth and then Arsenal. I wouldn't be fancying them to take anything from those 2 games. Then they get Leicester at home, and again they have to win that game, because then they go to Manchester City. And that gets us to November. Those 5 games. Ipswich home, Bournemouth and Arsenal away, Leicester home, and City away. That will be 9 Premier League games played. And game number 10 will see Everton come to town, in what might still be at that time a battle between the bottom 2. But the games get harder after that. They face a run of Wolves away, Liverpool home, Brighton away, Chelsea at home, Villa away, Spurs at home. Then they have to go to Fulham, and that brings us to Christmas. There's very few points in that run for Southampton if they're still playing the way they are at the moment. They look like a team bereft of confidence. They look like a team lacking in leadership. They have a manager who's quite idealistic. He's very young, he's very inexperienced. He obviously wants to play football the right way. But he seems a little bit naive to what the Premier League is. And he doesn't have the caliber of player to play the way he wants to play in this division. Now, we have seen other managers come up and play in a similar manner and survive. Obviously, Brendan Rodgers, notably at Swansea a few years ago, funnily enough, one of the clubs Russell Martin has managed in the past. But more often than not, when managers come up into the Premier League and they attempt to play this type of football, they get found out. They get caught short. Now, maybe not always in year one, but certainly in year two. But the problem for Southampton is getting to that year two. And oftentimes you'll see managers who come into the Premier League for the first time just ever so slightly alter what they want to do in order to survive that first year. Now, some, like Maresca, doesn't have to worry about that because he's gone to Chelsea. So survival is not necessarily an issue for the club. It could be for him, but not for the club. He can afford to walk in there and play the brand of football he wants because that's what he's been hired to do. And Chelsea know that there's absolutely no possibility that they're going to get relegated unless it's to do with points deduction for historic cheating. So he's safe for doing that. But Russell Martin is not. Now, it may well be that the Southampton board have told him that he is safe, that no matter what happens, they will stand by him, and if they go down, he will still be the man in charge there. And if that's the case, then that's fair enough. We saw that last year, certainly with Burnley and with Luton, where their managers were assured of their job security. Now, obviously, Luton did not come up and try and play an expansive brand of football, but we certainly saw Burnley try to do that, and it didn't work, and they got relegated. And Burnley invested a lot more money into their squad than what Southampton have done this summer, but Southampton have still made a lot of moves. But I want to go back to Russell Martin. So like I say, he's a very young manager. He's 38 years of age. He turns 39 in January. And he has been managing for 5 years in November coming. So he was only 33 when he started out, turned 34 then obviously a couple months later. He started out with MK Dons, where he had finished his playing career, moved on to Swansea, and then went to Southampton. So if we look at what happens when he takes over with MK Dons. So Paul Tisdale has been there. So MK Dons in the 17-18 season. No, sorry, the 16-17 season have been relegated from League One into League Two. Have I got that right? 16-17. No, sorry, 16-17, they finished mid-table. Robbie Nielsen takes over. The next season, it's a disaster. He gets sacked in January. Dan Michetti comes in, it's a disaster. Keith Millen takes over. They're already gone. They get relegated in the summer of 2018, and Paul Tisdale takes over. And Tisdale at that point was quite highly regarded because of the work he'd done with Exeter. He had been with Exeter from 2006 and really put in a lot of hard graft there. Brought them up from non-league, brought them up into League One. They've been up and down a couple of times, but he developed the academy there. That's the academy that produced, if I'm not mistaken, Ollie Watkins, as well as Rico Henry and Ethan Ampadu. They put a lot of focus on the academy, and he had been vital in doing all of that. So when MK Dons were able to nab him away, it was seen as quite the big deal that they'd gotten him in. So he brings them straight back up into League One. But the 1920 season starts disastrously, and he's out the door in early November. And unfortunately for Paul Tisdale, his career has never recovered. And everywhere he's gone since has been pretty much a disaster. But Russell Martin takes over, and he manages to keep them up. And then the next season, they finish in mid-table. Okay, so he stabilizes them in League One, but that's all he does. He stabilizes them in League One. And he's seen as a very promising young coach, but at this point, still an unproven young coach. Now, in the same 2021 season where he's stabilising MK Dons in mid-table in League One, Steve Cooper is leading Swansea to 4th in the playoffs and then defeat in the playoff final, and ultimately they failed to come up. And Cooper decides summer 2021 that he's just had enough of arguing and battling with the ownership, with the chairman. He agrees to stay on and start the pre-season process, and it's all very weird. And then Russell Martin, who had begun the pre-season process with MK Dons, leaves there and joins Swansea for the start of the 21-22 season. Now, bear in mind, they'd finished 4th the year before. They do lose a number of players that had been absolutely vital, because one of the things Cooper had done really well was he'd worked the loan market. So he'd had in Freddie Woodman, he'd had in Conor Hurlin, he'd had in Mark Weahy, he'd brought in Jordan Morris on loan, although I think that was more the American owners that had finagled that one. But they leave, and the calibre of loans coming in just simply aren't as good. But Swansea drop from 4th to 15th, which even when you factor Woodman and Guehi coming out of the squad and Conor Hurren as well, that's a really, really disappointing season, especially when you have Joel Perreault, who's one of the best players in the Championship, banging goals at the rate he does. So the next season then, 22-23, they improve a little bit. They finish in 10th. Not a playoff team, but an improvement nonetheless. They work some loans, they bring in some frees, they make a couple of mistakes, like, for example, not promoting Morgan Whittaker into the team, having him on the periphery and then sending him on loan. I think that's an example of just, poor talent ID by Russell Martin. But they finished 10th. Okay, so he's got MK Dons to Swansea, which is obviously a step up, without actually accomplishing a ton at MK Dons. He just stabilised them as a mid-table team. Now, they have since obviously been relegated back to League Two, so he can point and say, well, look, I was doing better than the guys that came after me. At Swansea, he's basically just kept them in mid-table. They were a playoff team for 2 previous years. He's put them in mid-table and kept them in mid-table. He's moved them up the mid-table, but he hasn't really accomplished anything there. But there is a view on him as a very highly sought-after young coach because of the style of play, because of how he works with his players. He's quite highly thought of. So, having failed to get Swansea into the playoffs in both years there, he gets the Southampton job. Now, Southampton obviously have just been relegated from the Premier League. They'd had a very strange season where Hassan Huttla was sacked in November. Nathan Jones was appointed for reasons nobody will ever understand. He was then fired. When you factor in the World Cup, I think he managed like 12 games. Let's just check that. He was there 4 months. I think it was 12 games. It was 14 games. It was 14 games he lasted. And then they decide to give it to Ruben Selles, who, funnily enough, looks set to become the new head coach of Stoke, I believe. I think I read that today. Let me just check. He's currently at Reading. He was linked to the Stoke job. Maybe nothing's going to come of it. But he's currently the Reading manager anyway. They decide to give it to him as a kind of a caretaker, but kind of also just see us through till the end of the season. They kind of just gave up, is basically what happened. When the Nathan Jones gamble backfired so spectacularly, they just gave up and accepted relegation. But they go down and they decide that Russell Martin is the man. So again, he's gone into MK Dons. He stabilised them in mid-table. He hasn't made them a playoff team. He has then gone up a level to Swansea. And he's brought them down into mid-table and then stabilised them in mid-table, but he hasn't made the playoffs. And then he gets the Southampton job. Now, he walks into a Southampton squad that's chock full of talent, but obviously has to start now making cuts. And it's quite chaotic in terms of ins and outs and who's going where and what players are going to have available to him. So, huge credit to him. He puts together a really good season. Like, they start the season well. There's no disruption. It's a really good start. They win 3 of their first 4 with a draw the other game, but then they lose 4 in a row. And then he puts together a really long unbeaten run. And it starts on the 30th of September, which is match week 9, and it ends on the 13th of February, which is match week 31. It goes unbeaten in between that. Mostly wins. Then they lose 3 of 4, and they start to stumble. They win a couple, they don't win in 3, they win 3, they lose 3. They fall out of the race for automatic promotion. Now, bear in mind, they were only in the automatic promotion spots for the last couple of weeks of their long unbeaten run, and then they dropped to 3rd, and then they would drop to 4th, and then they just stayed in 4th. They go into the playoffs. They beat West Brom. They go into the final. They're not fancied to beat Leeds, but they beat Leeds and they get promoted. So now he has accomplished something. And he's only 38. And he's got now a decent amount of experience behind him. But he's also now having to step up again. So you were talking about a manager that in 5 years will have managed League One, Championship, recently relegated from the Premier League, expect to go back up Championship, and now Premier League. That's 4 steps that this guy will have already managed at only 38. So it is challenging for him. He's never really been able to settle in at one level and show what he can do consistently. He's always having to chase something else because he's always moving on. Has he warranted those new jobs? Not necessarily, but when he's been given the opportunity at Southampton, he has shown himself to be the right man for the job. And I wasn't in favour of the appointment last year. I wasn't at all impressed by what I saw at Swansea. I understand that the football was good, but every manager that's come in and out of Swansea for the last 15 years has played good football. Results have to matter as well. Steve Cooper's probably the only guy that didn't play eye-catching football, and even at that, at times, there was really good football, but he got results, and that's ultimately what mattered. Russell Martin didn't get results. So, 38 years of age, he's managed 238 games, 80 at MK Dons. He won 37.5 of them, lost 31. Swansea, he managed 99 games. He won 36.36. He won 36. He lost 36. And now at Southampton, 59 games, 31 wins, 11 draws, 17 defeats, 52.54. What's notable to me is that at MK Dons, he just about broke even in terms of goal difference. He was +2. At Swansea, he was -4. Just about breaking even. Little in it there. I do think that's a promising sign. I do think those are promising signs. If you're finishing in and around 0 goal difference each year, I think you're doing a solid job. It's not spectacular, but then the clubs he took over weren't spectacular. But now he's got to figure out a way to do that at Southampton. Because ultimately, we have to throw out what took place last season. Because it's at a different level. So we look at that 59 games played, we can't credit you with that because they weren't at this level. This season, you've played 5 games. You've won 1, you beat Cardiff 5-4 in a ridiculous game of football. Sorry, 5-3, I should say, in a ridiculous game of football where you scored 2 goals in stoppage time to basically save your own embarrassment. But that's, again, a championship team. You've played 4 games against Premier League sides and you've lost all of them. Now, if we look at last season, so Leeds, who had been relegated with Southampton? Leeds and Leicester, of course, Leeds and Leicester. So how did they do against those teams last year in the Championship? Because Leicester have come up with them, obviously, but they were at a similar point where they'd been a Premier League team being relegated. So we know they beat Leeds in the playoff final, so that's good. They beat Leeds in the league twice. So they beat Leeds in all 3 games. That's very, very promising. That shows he can compete with teams who are of a similar level, where he doesn't necessarily have the type of advantage that he would have had over a lot of the Championship last year. They got hammered by Leicester in both games. So Leicester had their number. So if we count Leeds last year and Leicester last year, even though Leeds didn't come up, I still think there was enough of a squad there that you could have classed it as basically a Premier League squad. I would have said it was a better squad than what Luton had in the Premier League. But if we count those 5 games plus the 4 from this year against Premier League teams, you're talking 2 wins and 7 defeats, which you're really struggling. You're really going to be struggling. If you're not getting, you have to start drawing games. You have to be able to turn those defeats into draws and rescue points and have that ability to grind out results. And what we're seeing this year, like they go to Newcastle, Toon go down to 10 men early, and then Joelinton puts Newcastle 1 up, and the entire second half is Southampton bombarding the Newcastle goal and just not able to find any sort of traction on it. Then they lose 1-0 at home to Nottingham Forest with a Gibbs White goal in the second half. They go to Brentford and frankly they got played off the pitch. Even though they had the majority of the ball, every time Brentford got it, you thought they were going to score. And then United beat them, though they could have been 1 up if Cameron Archer doesn't blow the penalty. But you still weren't expecting them to go on and win the game. Even if they had scored, you didn't feel like they were going to win the game. There's enough talent in this squad to make it work. There really, really is. Like, I'm not a fan of Ramsdale. I don't like that move. But he is a goalkeeper that's proven himself in the Premier League. Defensively, you need to stop playing Jack Stevens. I don't care if he's the club captain. You absolutely need to stop playing him. It's been proven time and time again that Jack Stevens cannot play in the Premier League. Like, there's a reason that Jack Stevens, the last time they were up, got loaned out. There's a reason he's only played more than half the games in the Premier League three times in his career. Remember, he's been a Southampton first team player since 2016, and they're in the Premier League for most of his career bar last year. They cut his games because he wasn't up to the standard. He's fine as a depth centre-back. He cannot be starting for you. It may well be that you've got to put faith in these younger defenders, like Nathan Wood, like Ronnie Edwards. It may well be that you need to just try and work Armel Bella-Kotchap back into the squad. He's probably the most talented centre-back you've got. And him and Howard Bellis, their skill sets should mesh well. But you need to make some changes. You need to make changes at the back, or otherwise it's going to be a very long season of just waiting to get relegated. You're going to get pumped game after game after game. You've got talent in midfield. You've got talent on the wings. I do have question marks over whether you can score enough goals. But there's no doubting that there's a lot of talent at the club. But he's got to find a way to utilise it a lot better. And he's got to find a way to stop going for safety blankets. Like, I'm sorry. You cannot play certain players in the Premier League at this point in their careers. And Ryan Fraser is one of them. Ryan Fraser's not good enough to play in the Premier League. I know you had him there last season, and he was an important part of the squad in the Championship. The guy can't play in the Premier League anymore. Neither can Adam Lallana. These are not good enough players to play in the Premier League. And every time you put them on the pitch, you are hamstringing yourself. And if Russell Martin doesn't figure this out quickly and doesn't start adapting to what the demands of the Premier League are, then Southampton, even if they've told him they're willing to give him time, give him, backing, whatever, they might have to turn their back on that. Because it might just get so bad that they can't stick with it. Like, a club like Southampton, who have been in the Premier League as often as they have, cannot really afford to just accept relegation again. That's not a fan base that's going to be overly happy about accepting relegation again. This is a fan base that, to its credit, is very loyal, has been through the ringer with this club, multiple changes of ownership. At times, the future of the club started to look a little bit grim. But when we look back over the years of the Premier League, this is a club that's been there more often than not. So you go back to the start of the Premier League, they're in it every single year, right up until 04-05. They get relegated that year. They go into the Championship, they're there 4 years, they get relegated into League One, 2 years back up to the Championship, straight back up to the Premier League. And then they're in the Premier League every year from 2012-13, when Nigel Atkins brought them up, was then sacked and replaced by Pochettino. They're there every single year until 22-23, when it all falls apart. They went through a lot of different managers. Adkins, Pochettino, Koeman, Claude Puel, Pellegrino, Mark Hughes, Hasenhüttl, and then obviously the Nathan Jones fiasco. But this is a club that's been in League One as recently as 2011. and a fan base that was still showing up game after game after game and showing that loyalty. And I don't know that they'll be overly happy about accepting just going straight back down, because why should they? Like, it's one thing if a club that hasn't been in the division for 30 years comes up and goes straight back down the way Luton did. They can, like, no one expected Luton to get promoted. A lot of people expected Southampton to get promoted. A lot of people expect Southampton to stay up. No one expected Luton to stay up. Luton could sell it to the fans a lot easier, like, we didn't think we'd be here. We don't want to mortgage the future of the club. Southampton can't really do that. They've got to get this right quickly, or all of a sudden their season's going to be over and they're still going to have 20 games to play knowing that they're going to be relegated. Like, that's horrendous. It was like that the last time they were up. The last season. They were just so poor. And everybody knew they were going down. They hit the bottom of the table in match week 16. But before that, it still hadn't been good. Like, by the time they hit the bottom of the table in match week 16, they had lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games. 10 games, 3 wins, 3 draws. They hit the bottom. They lose 2 more, they win 1. They lose 3, they win 1. They lose 1, they win 1, they draw 1. And then their last win was the 4th of March. The 4th of March. That's horrific. Absolutely horrific. And then he managed 4 draws after that as well. Like, what an awful end. Just knowing that you're going down. And there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it. You're just going down. It feels that way already with them this season. And if they don't turn it around, that's exactly what's going to be. I'll be back after the break. Right, welcome back. So, this week is an exclusive Champions League week, which is a new and exciting decision by UEFA to pump up this whole league format that they've put us into in the Champions League. So today we have 6 games. Tomorrow we have 6 games. And Thursday we have 6 games. And as my good friend Guy Drinkle said, Champions League on a Thursday can only really be described as woke nonsense. Champions League does not deserve to be desecrated by having it on of a Thursday night. That's a night for secondary competitions, for Conference League and the Europa League. It's not a night for the Champions League to play. It's a little bit fitting that Arsenal are kidding themselves out of a Thursday night. But still, Champions League should not be getting played on a Thursday night. This is just for this week. From next week, it'll be just the Tuesday, Wednesday. This week, they want us all to have our eyes on the Champions League. So today, we have 6 games. We have Juventus against PSV Eindhoven in a 5:45 kickoff. So, Juve have started this Serie A season with 2 wins and 2 draws. New manager, obviously, in Thiago Motta. Quite a lot of turnover in the squad this summer. Curious to see how the new midfield that they've put together will work, especially considering the old midfield that was there was okay, and some of those players are quite good, and we'll see how Thiago Motta puts it all together. But they're taking on PSV Eindhoven. And obviously Eindhoven walked away with the Eredivisie last season, and this season they have started with 5 wins from 5. Peter Bosz, who's one of the most attack-minded coaches in the world, is doing for the first time in his life, or the first time in his managerial career, he's doing things the right way for a prolonged period of time. He's having success for a prolonged period of time. We saw him come from nowhere to get the Ajax job in 2016-17 and lead them to the Europa League final, and then immediately cash in on that to go to Dortmund. And it was a disaster at Dortmund, but he went from there to the Leverkusen job, and at Leverkusen it was up and it was down, and it was up and it was down, and it was up and it was down. You didn't know what you were going to get from one week to the next. And then he went to Lyon, and it was just flat out crap. But now at PSV, he seems to have just settled himself, and he seems to have a better grasp on balance. And congrats to him. It's great to see. So that is one of our 5:45 kickoffs. The other one is Aston Villa, who are away to Young Boys of Bern. Now, Villa will be heavily favoured to win this game. But if we take a look at the Swiss League, we can see that Young Boys have not made a particularly good start to the season. In fact, they've made a dreadful start to the season. They are bottom of the Swiss Super League. They have not won any of their 6 games so far. And I would imagine that Patrick Raman, who was appointed in the summer, is likely not going to be there for much longer. Because obviously, Young Boys have had tremendous success of late. They won the title last year and the year before. They also won it in 21, 20, 19, and 18. So you're looking at 6 of the last 7 league titles have been won by this club. And managers have used it as a bit of a launching pad for their careers. Gerardo Sioni obviously did so and went on. Rafael Vicky was there last year. He decided to leave. I'm not sure what it is he's going to do next, but he decided that he didn't want to stay on. Or was he sacked? He might have been sacked. I'm not 100% certain. But they won the league title, and this season they're bottom of the league. So big change is needed there, obviously. Villa have made a pretty good start to the Premier League. They currently sit in 5th. 3 wins and just a 1 defeat. In a game in which they probably should have beaten Arsenal. They were the better team for large portions and obviously missed some big chances. And in form, Ollie Watkins probably wins them that game. Then we have the 8 p.m. kickoffs, and there are 4 of them. So first up, Real Madrid, the defending champions, the best team in European Cup history by a million miles, the best club in European Cup history by a million miles. But their La Liga start hasn't been ideal. They've played 5, won 3, drawn 2. 11 points. They're level on points with Atletico Madrid and Villarreal, but they're 4 points behind Barcelona already, who've made a great start under Hansi Flick. And Hansi's proven at Bayern that he is a very, very good manager, so we'll see how that continues. But for Real, they'll have confidence in the process. They're just settling in with Mbappe and all of this kind of stuff. So they'll be confident that as the season moves forward, they're going to be right in the mix to win the biggest honours, including Champions League. Stuttgart are currently 10th in the Bundesliga. Obviously, only 3 games in, 1 win, 1 draw, and 1 defeat. Bayern taking on Dinamo Zagreb. At the weekend, Bayern just decimated Holstein Kiel, but I mean, it's not exactly the who's who of opposition. They are first in the Bundesliga. They're the only team to have won all 3 games thus far. Harry Kane has started the season in good form, so we'll see how that goes. They take on Dinamo Zagreb, who are currently 3rd in the HNL, which is the Croatian top flight. 4 wins, 1 draw, 1 defeat from their 6 league games so far. Then we've got Sporting against Lille. Now, Sporting have started the Portuguese season in tremendous form. 5 wins from 5, 19 goals scored. The next closest is 9. Only 2 conceded, which is the joint best along with Vittoria. The 3 points clear. Now, they haven't been tested as yet, but this looks like the best team that Ruben Amorim has had since going there. Lille, obviously the big thing for them in the summer was keeping Jonathan David, even though they did lose a couple of others. They're currently 8th in the French league. 4 games in, 2 wins, 2 defeats. They're 6 points behind PSG, but more importantly, they're 4 points behind Monaco, who sit 3rd, which is the final Champions League spot for France. And then Milan versus Liverpool. Now, Milan have had a disappointing start. There's just no way to look at it otherwise. They sit 10th in Serie A. 1 win, 2 draws, 1 defeat. Paulo Fonseca was brought in to be the agent of change, replacing Stefano Pioli. And thus far, not a whole lot has changed, except they've gotten worse. So he's going to need to get his act together quite soon and sort that out. Liverpool were looking good until the weekend when they lost to Forest, but they sit 4th in the Premier League with 9 points, 3 points off top. They'll be top 3. They'll be top 3 come to the end of the season, but it will be nice to at least give ourselves the illusion that we might win the Premier League. Anyway, those are your 6 games for tonight. I am picking Juventus, Villa, Real, Bayern, Sporting, and Liverpool to win. Or am I? Do I just pick the draw? I'll just go the draw in the Liverpool-Milan game. I'll be cowardice. I'll go the draw. So, Juventus, Villa, Real, Bayern, Sporting, and a draw. And I'll see you after this break. Thanks, welcome back. It just occurred to me that I never went through the Serie A clubs and what they did in the summer. So we can have a look now at the 5 Champions League teams, see what they got up to. So, AC Milan, they bring in Alex Jimenez, that was a loan with an obligation. They sign Samuel Longo as a forward for their second team for whatever reason. They sign Alvaro Morata, they bring in Stohinja Pavlovic, they bring in Emerson Royale, they bring in Yusuf Fofana, Silvano Voss arrives for the Futures team, they loan in Tammy Abraham, and going out the door, there is Radek Krunic, Olivier Giroud, Charles de Ketelaere, who've been on loan, Simon Kjaer, who I expect will probably retire, Mattia Caldara, who went to Medina, that poor fella, he was on target to be a top defender, but his knee just never played ball with him. Giancarlo Simic, he left for Anderlecht. Daniele Maldini went to Monza. They loaned out a bunch of young players, but they also loaned out Yassine Adli, Pierre Kalulu, and Alexis Salamakers in kind of a loan swap with Tammy Abraham. So, I think they got better in attack. You know, they lose Giroud, they bring in Morata, that's about a push, but then they bring in Tammy Abraham, so definitely improving there. Defensively, they improve. I'm not a huge fan of Emerson Royale, but he's solid. And Pavlovic is a really, really good get. And then Yusuf Fofana is not nearly as good as people make him out to be, but he is a good player, and he does improve them in midfield. So across the board, they've improved. They haven't spent a huge amount. The only big money sale really is the Ketelaere, which had been agreed a year in advance. I think they've had a really good summer. I would give them an A-. Moving on to Inter Milan. So, going out, Juan Cuadrado, Matteo Zanotti, Gaetano Oristanio, and Luciano Gomez. Not overly thrilled that they gave up on Gomez so cheaply and so early. They also let Davy Klaassen leave, which is no loss at all. Stefano Sensi left, he went to Monza. Alexis Sanchez left, he went to Udinese. They also loaned out a whole bunch of young players, including Franco Carboni, and Valentin Carboni, both very talented. They also loaned out Filip Stankovic, who I think has a bright future for them. Martin Satriano, I think there might be an obligation to buy or an option to buy in that one. Coming in on loan, Alex Perez from Real Betis, the young centre-back to add depth. They buy Carlos Augusto, decent addition. They had him in on loan, I believe, haven't they? Haven't they had him on loan last year? They had him on loan last year. So that one makes sense. They bring in Davide Fratese, who they'd had on a loan with an obligation to buy. So obviously that one makes a ton of sense. Not overly keen that they made the Arnautovic deal permanent, but they did, but they'd had him there. So, Zielinski on a free is a great signing. They bring in Luka Topolovic, who I don't know, from a club in Slovenia. I'm not massively familiar with that player at all. Josep Martinez arrives from Genoa. I assume the view is that he is their next number one goalkeeper. They've obviously got Jan Sommer at the moment, but he's 35. I assume it's Martinez for a year or two, and then Martinez is the backup for a year or two, and then he takes over. I assume that's the succession plan there. They sign Mehdi Taremi on a free. That's a really good get. They bring in Thiago Romano from Panathinaikos, not a player I know. And Thomas Palacios comes in, 21-year-old centre-back from Talleres in Argentina, who's very, very highly regarded. 6'5", apparently quite dominant, good ball player. So, not a ton of money spent. The biggest signing, obviously, is Fratesi. That was a deal they'd agreed last year. Inter were working with quite a tight budget because Inter have significant financial problems. But ultimately, they kept Bastoni, they kept Barea, they kept Laturo, and they added to the squad. They've improved. Now, they haven't improved spectacularly, but Mehdi Taremi is a good backup addition in attack, more good depth. Zielinski is a quality addition in midfield. He could start for them quite easily. So, ultimately, you look at the squad, you look at what they did, and I think you have to be pretty impressed. I think you have to be pretty impressed by what they've done. There is a lot of promise in this squad, as well as the existing caliber, or the existing quality. If you just look, say, 26 and under, take a long-term view on this, Martinez, big-time talent in goal. Carlos Augusto, Yanel Besic, Fede DeMarco, Thomas Palacios, and Alessandro Bastoni in defence. That's the bones of a good future defence. Midfield, Fratesi, Buchanan, Aslani. Beret is 27, so he's a little bit older than that, but if you want to include him, you can too. And then in attack, you've got, again, they're a little bit older than 27, but you've got Marcus Thuram, you've got Laturo. So I'd say 27 and below to include those three. Like, that's a lot of talent to have. That's pretty close to a midfield that you can roll out against anybody. An attack you can roll out against anybody. And defensively, you probably need a long-term right wing back and one more centre back, and you're going to be really good. So I think they can be happy. I'll give them a B for what they did, a B plus for what they did, considering the financial restrictions they're under. Bologna next. So Salamakers goes out. He'd been there last year. He goes back to Milan at the end of his loan. Arnautovic, obviously, they sold him, but he hadn't played there last year. Lewis Binks, he'd been on loan. He goes as well. Balderson goes out on loan. They lose Joshua Zirkzee. They lose Calafiori. They sell Sidney Van Hooijdonk. And then the biggest departure of all, obviously, is Thiago Motta heading to Juventus. Remo Freuler's deal gets made permanent. They sign Emil Holm. That's a really good get. They sign Jens Odgaard, who's quite highly thought of, forward player, midfielder, attacking midfielder type, who'd been at AZ Alkmaar. They bring in Juan Miranda, who's a solid player. Nicolo Cambiaggi comes in from Atalanta. He's one that I think is quite highly thought of, but hasn't yet really produced on a regular basis on the loans he's had. He'd been at Atalanta, they'd loaned him a few times. Thiels de Linga, last season was pretty good for Toulouse, and to be fair, the season before as well. So big step up for him. We'll see how he gets on. Martin Ehrlich comes in, centre-back, joins from Sassuolo. I quite like the look of him. Curious to see how he does this year. Benjamin Dominguez comes in from Gimnasia in Argentina, 20-year-old winger, very promising. And Nicolo Casale comes in from Lazio on loan. Ultimately, they lost Calafiori, they lost Xerxes. That's enormous. And, you know, they bring in a ton of money for those two players and for Arnautovic. They probably brought in the better part of 100 million euros. They spent less than 50. It's a little bit disappointing for me. Now, they did bring in Tommaso Pobega from Milan on loan and Samuel Illing Jr. on loan, both of whom are talented, but I do worry that they've just skimped a little bit. I would have liked to have seen them invest a decent amount in a guaranteed starter at the back, someone that can come in and replace Calafiori. Now, the case is, though, that last season there were games where he didn't play because they felt they had the numbers. So maybe they still feel they have the numbers, but I'm a little bit concerned. I'll give them a B-. I think they got good fees for the players they sold. A little bit low on Calafiori, but the injuries, of course, do factor in there. Juventus. Going out, Jesus. There's just so many players. They own far too many players. It's just stupid. Carlos Alcaraz goes back after his loan. Samuel Illing Jr. goes to Aston Villa. Adrian Rabiot is released. Moise Kean goes to Fiorentina. Daniele Rugani goes to Ajax, having wasted his career at Juve. Caviglia goes to Venezia. Moretti goes to Genoa. Excited to see how he does. Alexandro leaves in a free. Wojciech Szczesny retires. Desilio, he goes to Empoli. Chiesa goes to Liverpool. Nanja goes to Troyes. Thiago Giallo goes to Porto. Filip Kostic goes to Fenerbahce. There's also about 10 others that left, and I just can't be bothered getting into them all. Let's just do the incomings. Douglas Luiz from Aston Villa. Michele Di Gregorio from Monza. It's a really good get. Kefren Turam, it's a really good signing. Juan Cabal comes in from Hellas Verona. Pierre Kalulu comes in from Milan. Nico Gonzalez comes in from Fiorentina. That's a loan with an obligation to buy. Francisco Conceição comes in on a loan with an option to buy. And 10 Koopmeiners comes in. So a lot of incomings. Quite a lot of money spent. I like that they've protected themselves on the Di Gregorio is, I think, an obligation, and I think Nico Gonzalez is an obligation, but the Conceição one is an option to buy. And my feeling is that it probably doesn't happen. I'm going to guess they don't take up that option to buy next summer. But you look at the midfield with Douglas Luiz, Kefren Turam, and Koopmeiners added into it. You factor in that in midfield they already had Locatelli, they already had Weston McKennie, they already had Fagioli. That's a really strong midfield group now. A really, really strong midfield group. The forward group, they do have some question marks over, but there is a lot of talent in there with Vlahovic, with Yildiz, with Nico Gonzalez. I'm not overly sold on Timothy Weah, not overly sold on Conceição. And Milik is a decent backup striker. Like, at times he's been better than that, but that's what he is now. Defensively, I have concerns. I think their fullbacks, Cambiaso's pretty good. Like, Cambiaso's good. He's flat out good. The rest of the fullbacks I'm not hugely keen on. Cabal might play as a left back. I don't rate Bremer particularly highly. I'm not a big fan of Gatti. Danilo is way past his best. I don't know why he's still at the club. Kalulu's solid, but that's about it. Like, a couple of little young players there. Di Gregorio is going to be the best goalkeeper they've had in a few years. And they still have Matteo Perin, who's still a talented goalkeeper in his own right. So it's a massively improved squad. Some of the business I love. Some of it I'm a little bit questioned on. But I'm going to give them an A. And I'm going to move on then quickly to Atalanta. Going out, Duvan Zapata, Ibrahima Colli, Giuseppe De Serio, Caleb Okoli, Nicolo Cambiaggi, Nadir Zortia, Alexei Morinchuk, Pierluigi Gallini, Hans Hattabor, Juan Musso, and Taylor Koopminers, as well as Mitchell Bakker. Albalou Torre also loaned out. So end of an era in a lot of ways, because Zapata, Gallini and Hattabor were part of that first sort of wave of Atalanta under Gasperini. Calling in Charles de Ketelaere. That was a deal that was obviously done because he played for them last year. They bring in Ben Godfrey, Nicolo Zaniolo, love that on loan. Ibrahim Sulemane, it's a good signing. Retegui, because they lost their starting striker. Because Skamaki got hurt, so they went and bought Retegui. I hate them for doing that. I do. I hate them for doing that. I was really hoping Retegui would take off this year with Genoa. Because, you know, I was actually really excited for Genoa this season. I thought there was a real chance that they'd be really good with the likes of Frendrup. Obviously, my goalkeeper, Martinez, I thought he was going to be there. And they just stolen my players. I knew Moretti was coming in, and Yukone De Winter was going to be there. Vitinha was coming in. I thought they'd play the two of them up front. It just wasn't to be. Just wasn't to be at all. Genoa let me down constantly. Just selling off players. Not really caring too much about the fan base. Like, Albert Gudmundsson is another one. Like, he should still be at the club. But he's been sent out on loan as well. Don't really understand that one. Not really understand at all. Not really understanding that one at all. Maybe it was disciplinary stuff. I don't know what it was, but he's been brilliant the last 2 years. And I really thought Genoa were going to be good this year. But anyway, Bellanova comes in. Bellanova's a really good get. Who else they bring in? Juan Cuadrado's a nothing player at this point. Rui Patricio's a backup goalkeeper. Casuno I like. They bring in Ben Godfrey. Meh. I'll give them a B. I don't think it's an earth-shattering window by any stretch, and I'm annoyed that they took the take from me. So, yeah, it's a B, and I'm going to just leave it there. I'll be back later today with 2 Footed Extra. See you later.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.